All right, so we're gonna try doing things a little bit differently today. I'm going to pre-mix our colors, and then so we don't have to mix our colors once we're painting. Let me know if you like this method or if you prefer mixing on the fly. So we're gonna break it down. The crust is gonna have 3 main colors, the filling is gonna have 3 main colors, and then we'll do 1 or 2 for the plate. Our first color is gonna be kind of a light yellowish brown. So I've got a yellow, and then I've got this kind of it's like a cross between a yellow and an orange. It's called gold. It's like a yellow gold. So this is too bright for our crust, so we're going to tone it down. And how we want to do that is we're going to mix its opposite on the color wheel. So the opposite to kind of yellow and orange would be a purple or a blue. So I'm going to do a tiny little bit of purple, and this is going to kind of desaturate the color a little bit. So that's the first color we're going to use. If you don't have this kind of gold color, which you probably won't, try mixing a bit of yellow and orange, and then toning it down with a purple. You could do a tiny little bit of black. It depends what you have. So this is going to be our lightest crust color. Okay, and the next color is going to be more of an orangey brown. So I've got this bright orange color, and obviously this is going to be way too saturated for a crust, but we'll use it as the base. So we're going to put that down, dunk in some more water, and I am going to add a bit more of that purple that I like to use. And that should help desaturate it a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna need it darker, so let's add more pigment because it's pretty light. And some more of that purple. You could try adding in some brown as well. We've got a burnt umber there, and that will tone it down too. And I like that color, so let's go with that. So this will be our mid-range color. Next, we're gonna mix up the darkest dark for our crust. And this is gonna be a little bit more of a brown red. So I'm gonna start with this burnt umber. I'm gonna mix in a little bit of red to make it warmer. Let's test that out. Maybe a bit more red. Okay, I'm gonna add a touch of purple, and that's gonna darken it up. A bit more purple. You can try adding blue as well. Okay. I feel like I'm not getting a lot of pigment. Okay, there we go. We're gonna go a touch darker. And just keep adding your colors until you kind of get a decent amount of match. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to kind of get it as close as you can. And as you gain more experience with your palette and your colors, you're going to get better and better at this. But don't be afraid to add in color and then test it out on your paper. See what that does. I made that too red. And that's gonna really help you gain experience mixing colors. It's just really test them out. Keep mixing stuff in, make a mental note. Like, what does that do? Okay, I like this. Let's go with that. We've got it pretty saturated. Okay. So those are going to be our 3 colors for the crust. All right, so we want to clean our brush pretty good. So the next color we're going to be mixing is the filling. Now, you would think that with blueberry pie, it would be a form of blue, but it's actually not. It's a, we're going to start out with the lightest is going to be a pink, and it's just going to darken from there. So depending on what color palette you have, I'm going to start out with this red, and it's very pink. It's a pinky red. So I'm going to start out with this because it's what I have. And now this is going to be, it's going to need a little blue added to it. So I'm going to add a touch of blue. And this is going to just bring it a little more purpley. Maybe a touch more blue. And you want to be very sparing with when you're trying to tone down colors, because a little goes a long way. Honestly, I think that's a great color to start with. I'm just going to add a bit more water to mine and put that down. Okay, that looks great. All right, next up is our mid-tone. And so I'm going to take more of that kind of pinky red color that I've got. And this is going to be darker and less saturated. So I'm going to take more of my blue and I'll put that in there. And now it's kind of like a plum color. I'm going to do a little bit more of the pink and blue just to get a bit more pigment. That's too purple, so I went too much with blue. So let's put more of the red back in. I think that's pretty good. So this is going to be our next color. This could even go a little bit more on the red side. But that's pretty close. The next filling color is quite dark. So what we're gonna do, just clean your brush. I always clean my brush in between I'm mixing colors. I'm gonna take that red and we're gonna kind of do the same thing, except we're gonna really darken this up. So red, blue, more red. I've got a couple reds I'm just playing with. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a touch of black. Like I said before, a little goes a long way. If you've got too much, just dab it off on something. Okay, a little bit more. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, we're gonna do a little bit more black. Because the darkest dark on the filling is actually quite dark. I'm gonna say let's go with that. It may read almost black on the camera, but you never want to add just pure black on to any painting, at least very sparingly. So if you read something as black with your eyes, generally it's always tinted with like a warm or a cool color. So this is a warm black essentially, because it's got undertones of that that red and purple in it, and you can see it. And not a lot. You're never going to really use pure black in a painting because it doesn't read as realistic when you do. Now for the plate, let's do one color, but we'll use it in varying strengths. So what I mean is we'll mix one color, but we can add more or less water to the actual painting to create a little bit more depth within the plate. So this is the plate, as you can see from the reference photo, is kind of a gray color. And instead of just watering down black and calling it a day, let's create a little bit more interest than just watered down black. And I'm seeing, with my eyes, I'm seeing kind of a warm tone gray. So we'll do the same. So we'll start with a warm base, which would be, we could do a brown, an orange, a red. Those are all warm colors. So I'm gonna do maybe a bit of red, a bit of brown, mix that in, okay. And now we're gonna go in with the black. And now we're gonna want this quite diluted because this is quite dark. So let's water it down quite a bit and test her out. So that's pretty purple. I am gonna say maybe let's add a bit of orange into this. And now we'll push it more to the brown side of things. You can also add brown. Okay, let's see. It's all about experimenting. Let's add a little bit of blue. Oh, that might be too green. I don't know. Okay, get more water in there. You know what, that did the trick. So we're adding that blue, and that's a pretty decent match. So water that down. Okay, and then the more water you add to it, the lighter it will get, and then I'll just do a bit more concentrate to the swatch on this side. And we can use those two to create a bit of depth within the plate. So you've got your all your colors already pre-mixed. I found I did this when I was a beginner, when I was first mixing colors, because it kind of just helped me in the flow of the painting. So I figured we'd give this a shot, see how you guys like it. Let me know what your preference is. But I like to break down the colors, and we'll, as we go along in these workshops and stuff, you'll kind of gain a bit more understanding about color theory as we go along. But if you need any more explanation on any of this stuff, let me know. I'm happy to do more explaining or a video on it. All right, my friends, so in this first layer, we're just gonna go in where all the filling is and just block in some color. And you want to make sure that in between the crust sections where the filling is going, you want to leave little spots of white to kind of show the highest points of the blueberry shining through, just to give it a little bit of texture and dimension. You don't have to pre-wet the paper or anything. Just go in with your pigment and go in on the dry paper and block those colors in. Okay, you may be asking, why didn't I just go in with the dark color right away? Like, why do you need to put down the pink color? Well, my friends, I like to put the lightest lights first because if I mess up like I did in this square, this should be crust, but I put the filling color right there. So by starting out with the lightest color, I can just wet my brush and get that wet and take a paper towel and dab that color off. But if I went dark right away, I would have been unable to do that because once that dark color is down, it is hard to get back off. Now that I know I'm not gonna mess up the filling, I have kind of a guideline of where I'm putting those darkest colors. I'm gonna go in with my third tone, which was the darkest color for the filling, and I'm going to go in and paint all of the ones that are laced in the pie here. So this section, I'm gonna leave this area because this has a bit more detail and varying colors, but all these ones are all fairly uniform and dark. And then just keeping in mind, keeping little areas of light shining through that black. So don't color it all one black color, just go and make sure you're keeping some light areas in there just to give it a little bit of dimension and depth to it. All right, so let's block in some of these dark areas. Like I said before, I'm just kind of leaving a little bit of that light color shining through just so that it's not, just gives a little more depth and interest. If that doesn't interest you, just block in the whole thing with the color, no big deal. And as I progress, I notice that some of these areas aren't darkening up the way I would like. So I take some of that pigment, and while the paper is still wet, I drop that pigment into the filling area just to darken it up, and it naturally blends itself, which is something that's super wonderful with watercolor. And I'm actually filming TikToks while I do this as well, if you see the camera pop into view. My biggest tip for replicating patterns within the painting is constantly look at your reference photo. I have on my computer right in front of me the reference photo, and I'm looking back and forth at my painting and photo and trying to just replicate some of the shapes in that area. It helps, honestly. Don't get too caught up on the detail. It's really about the illusion of detail. So in this next section, I'm going to slow down the process a little bit and kind of explain what I'm doing here. So I'm going to take that mid-tone color that we mixed up. And in this section, if you look at the reference photo, it's quite a bit lighter. And it has a lot of these like red and pink pigments shining through. So we would just want to go in and look at the reference photo and kind of replicate where we're seeing those bright red tones. The color really pops in this area because the filling is quite thin. So you're getting a lot of that color and light shining through, whereas within the pie, it's, under the crust area and there's a lot of shadow, whereas the shadow doesn't get a chance to kind of establish in this area. So I'm just going through and taking that mid-tone color and blocking in that area. And while that mid-tone color of the filling is still wet, I'll take the darkest dark and I'll just plop that right into the wet mid-tone paint, and it will help. It will just darken you see I put it along the edge, and it will automatically just blend because that area is still wet, which is perfect. You may have noticed by now as well with watercolor is that when you go and put on a layer of paint, it will appear much darker than what it will actually dry as. So when you put it on, you're like, oh, that's perfect. That's as dark as I want it to go. And then it will dry and you're like, hey, wait a minute. That doesn't appear as dark as I need it to be. So you're going to have to go over the area again and just take more of that pigment and layer it on top another time until you get a sufficient amount of contrast, which is fine. And you can see where the pie was cut in the reference photo along the edges of the crust. There's that bright pink color. And so I'm just going in and filling in those areas. with that mid-tone filling color. So we're gonna bounce to the crust section, and we're gonna take the lightest color that we mixed up for the crust, and we're just gonna start blocking in the lace crust section. Paying attention to the reference photo, you can see that the edges of that crust area are kept fairly light. Without any blending, I'm just going to make sure that I don't paint those areas. So along the edge where the lace itself is intersecting. And then what you want to do is come in with that mid-tone and start darkening up those edges. Specifically around the very edge of the pie is going to be the very darkest. And then when you go in with the details of where the crust is lacing together, you want to only paint the high points of that area. And I'm taking, I'll clean my brush in between an area and then softly blend out some of the edges. You don't have to be super specific on that. I just kind of sporadically do it. Some edges are left hard, which means no blending, and then some areas I will wet my brush, dry it off, and then just blend it out messily, just so that they're all not hard edges, giving a little variety. And then we're taking the darkest crust area, and this is kind of the section where you're paying attention to where the crust has kind of gained that almost that caramelization. This mostly happens on the very edge of the pie, and so not so much on the inner detail work of the lace. So I go in with that darkest dark, and I go along the edge of the pie, just filling in some of those line details, and I also darken up those little heart cutouts that you see in the pie, and I fill those in with the darkest darks. And once I've finished a little bit of a section, I'll go in with a clean brush and I'll blend out the hard edges that are on the inner space of the pie. So not the edges that are sitting closest to the plate, but more I'll blend the edges that are facing the inner section of the pie. And because I don't know how to leave well enough alone, I go in further with some of that darkest crust pigment, and I start plopping in to the wet sections more of that pigment, and that will just help further darken those areas up. And that's all personal preference, and I'll go and blend those edges as well. Next, you're going to want to take that shade that we mixed up for the plate, and you're going to put a little shadow on the underside of the hearts where the hearts are touching the table, and this grounds it to the surface so they're not just floating in air. All right, so load up your brush for the plate, and what we want to go, start out strong, get some good pigment down on there, and then we're going to want to wet our brush and soften some of the edges. And we're just kind of mimicking the pattern of the dark areas of the plate, and we can be quite loose with this. We're just putting that dark pigment where we see those darkest darks on the plate, and just really going in with our clean brush and softening those edges. And we can be really messy, plop the water right into the pigment to create some texture. Try not to think about it too much. Have fun with it. This section, really, you don't have to worry too much about details. Just try to mimic where you're seeing some of those dark shadows, and try not to go super dark with it. We don't want a black plate. As you get closer to the top of the plate, you're going to notice that the pigment is quite light there. So we're going to want to dilute our that gray color quite a bit, because that's the side where the light is coming. And it's always good, before you start any painting, think about where the light source is coming from, because that's really going to help you visualize where your lightest lights and your darks are coming from, because you're mimicking light and shadow when you're painting. I'm going to include another video where it breaks down more of the reference photo, but I hope you enjoyed.